When looking for the king of podcasts, you're at the wrong channel.
Well, excuse me!
Looking for good ideas for life? You're far from good hands.
Hey, bud, what's your problem?
If you think the listener is always right, you're far from the right place.
Out of order! Even in the future, nothing works!
Hosted by a Northeasterner by birth, but a rebel by choice.
Are you threatening me?
If you want a host that floats between love and madness,
and we know the night is always gonna be here anyway. Thinking of you's working up my appetite. Looking forward to a little afternoon delight.
then play on and listen to Crazy Train Radio.
All right, guys, listen to this blues riff and B. Watch me for the changes and try and keep up, okay?
Warning, creators of this game do understand the subject matter may be offensive to some, but they do honor the families and people that have been affected by these real-life tragedies that these individuals have caused. Want to play a game?
Oh, yeah!
Lover of true crime?
Yes, yes, yes.
Well, we got an interesting game for you to check out.
Wow.
With the mashup of influences such as horror movies, collecting cards, and RPGs.
What?
Led to giving birth to an incredible creation of this game, Killers, the card game.
You are all my children now.
This game is a collectible trading card game featuring some of the most infamous killers, with tidbits of trivia on the back of each card to help you learn some insight to each criminal.
Who the hell are you?
Let's not forget, during the game, cops will be chasing you and these criminals.
I'm a cop, you idiot!
However, check out their website listed through all social media today, which can be found under Killers, the card game.
Am I on the internet?
I want to play a game.
Hey folks, it's your least favorite host in the podcast world, the Croc, Jonathan Steele. And boy, do we have a good one for you today. Well, before we get into the fun for today, I wanted to give Dr. Mike an opportunity, since he couldn't be with us for the Terry tribute, to speak anything he would like on Mr. Funk, if you will, sir. Doing my bad Dusty.
No, it's a good Dusty. Everybody does. It's always good to salute Dusty, who was a touring attraction, as was Terry Funk as an NWA world champion. Only cut short, and I don't know how many people talk about this, he asked to have the title taken off him after whatever it was, 14, 15 months, so he could get his longtime love since junior high, Vicky, back. They'd separated, and I've not heard of any NWA world champion or anybody of that high-end caliber. But, you know, after seeing him defend his title, soon after he won it, he came into Los Angeles, and I got to shoot him ringside, defending against Chavo Guerrero, obviously senior, and a wealth of other matches, unusual matches, because Terry was like Ric Flair and being able, actually, the primo guy could adapt to anybody's style. But Terry and Vicky had one of those long, wonderful wrestling marriages, you know, obviously bumps and ups and downs. And I was just focused on it because from about 1988 on, I would take the same picture of them posed together, just thinking, oh, this will be sort of like the Beatles thing, where, you know, obviously a way more famous photographer had posed them in like right before they split up in 69, 1970, the same way they had posed in 1963 or 62 when their very first album came out. So I did that with Terry and Vicky, usually at Cauliflower Alley and other reunions, and had them pose, her on the left, him on the right, in front of my lens. And so there was a natural progression. You could see them aging together, which I just thought was cool. I did that a few years with Marty and Dory Jr., but Terry was such a family guy from the whatever it was called, the Russellcade in 1997 right near his home, the Double Cross Ranch, which I got to stay at, and Terry picked me up, and a lot of stories from that. That was the big famous match with Bret Hart that was supposed to be Terry's umpteenth retirement. That was a big basis and kind of the heart of Beyond the Mat, the documentary, the Barry Blaustein documentary. And so many great memories of Terry, like posing with goofy glasses. He just pulled them out. He had them on his person backstage at the Olympic. Goofy glasses and goofy teeth he just put in, and it was making faces for me when I was shooting Tri-X black and white film. And Terry this was at a John Clark Wrestling Flyer convention, I think in Philly or Jersey in 1992. The room I was given by the promoter was at a hotel down the way, and Terry had a big gigantic suite, 2-bedroom suite, and just told me, take the other room, so you don't have to leave, and was gracious with that. But so a lot of fun events with Terry at the ranch with his mother. It was the only time I got to shoot Dory and Terry with their mother, Dory Funk Sr.'s widow, at that ranch in 97. And with all the wrestlers that came in from Japan, both men's and women promotions from Japan, a ton from ECW. Obviously, WWF sent in their crew, but it was mostly an ECW show. And seeing Paul Heyman, Sandman, Taz, Balls Mahoney, Axel Rotten, Francine, Beulah, fishing, kicking back. This was way before the show that evening, kicking back and just fishing in their play clothes at his ranch and eating. And then they all clustered around Terry in particular when Stu Hart and the Hart crew, Ross, Bruce, Brett hadn't arrived yet, because he was on that heavy WWF schedule as world champion then for them. But, at that barbecue and just seeing the love Terry had for Stu, and also being with him in December 15th of 1995 at the Stampede. It was, and Jonathan, I bored you with this. It was Stu Hart's 80th birthday. So the family was celebrating, and Ross and Bruce brought me in as their event photographer for Stu's 80th birthday party, private thing with the family, and all the wrestlers there, Chris Jericho, Lance Storm, everybody was at this thing. The original Dan Crawford, as well as the guy using the name Dan Crawford teaming with Doug Furnace for All Japan. So I posed those two. The original Dan Crawford, Dan King Crow Crawford, was Stu's lead babyface, late 60s, 70s. And Terry and Dory came in. They were on the undercard underneath the big Davey Boy Smith challenge to Bret Hart's title challenge. Anyway, Dory and Terry against Brian Pillman and Bruce Hart, who were the perennial longtime Stampede tag champions for Stu. And just seeing Terry as well at that event, just giddy being around Stu and, offering up his Stu impressions in front of Stu and the other Hart family. Terry Funk loved the business, loved his predecessors, the legends, obviously starting with his own father, to Stu Hart and Munchnick and Eddie Graham. He just loved all of those guys. Even Roy Shire, when he came in for the last two Battle Royals Roy Shire had, historic Dory and Terry. Basically, it was a six-man, but it boiled down to Dory and Terry against Gene Kiniski and Bruiser Brody. And it doesn't get much more exciting for an old fart like me than that kind of a tag match. Or at Kiel Auditorium, the Funk Brothers against Jack Briscoe and Gene Kiniski. at a Wrestling at the Chase, not Kiel, I'm sorry, it was at the Wrestling at the Chase, a free TV taping. It was on free TV in St. Louis, or just a multitude of insanely fun Terry Funk. He was ever a shapeshifter. He was kind of like, we'd later, tell him in the 80s, oh gosh, you were back in the 70s, you were like Madonna, because every time he came in, particularly Los Angeles, where he came in almost annually from 1968 on, when he and his father and Dory Jr. helped promoter Mike LaBelle battle off a Vern Gagne challenge to Los Angeles. We had a brief territory war, and Munchnick sent in all the heavy artillery. So we got all these names coming in from all these NWA territories that the fans had no idea. They knew they were big kind of from the Stanley Weston magazines, but I remember Dory Sr., Jr., and Terry coming down the ramp, their debut there, and Terry was like screaming, "We're here, we're finally here in Los Angeles." They were all heels, but they were getting the face reaction, which didn't ever happen then. They were on this huge, massive, loaded, stacked car to destroy Vern Gagne's AWA show at the nearby Fabulous Forum. And here, Mike LaBelle's LA long-running act was at the Olympic Auditorium. Just, the quiet moments with Terry, or, him, yakking with Vicky about stuff, or his daughters. And then the effect that he had on people, like Tommy Dreamer still cries big time, thinking that Terry's no longer with us in this world. What an effect he had on many, many people globally. Legends. The Funks were like the first babyface gaijin Americans in Japan. And in particular, Terry, who Japan loved. Most of the foreigners that would come, we call them gaijins, or that's foreigner in Japanese, when they'd come to Japan, whether for Ricky Dozan or All Japan, New Japan, they were usually always heels. The Funks were the very first, and in particular, Terry was just absolutely loved by the crowd, and that's where he had his first retirement. And you see on the TV and in the magazines all the towels, "So long, Terry, we love you, Terry." This was, his first of many, many retirements. So I can't think of anyone who had that much impact and love, respect, all of those things. I don't know. Let me ask you, because I wasn't part of the thing. What were some of your memories or thoughts of Terry?
Obviously, my stuff was more, from when I was alive, but obviously, I dive back to stuff. But I would say the ECW stuff, a lot of the movie stuff, all that kind of thing. And I had a chance to deal with him on the indies a little bit in the early 2000s. But to put a bow on this, and you would know this better than I would, so I'll ask you, is why does it seem like, or why did it seem like, that Terry was always 5 to 10 years ahead of the game when it came to the business? Was it because he was a generational guy, or was it Terry just that smart?
Well, that was what we call Terry brain. You remember he wisely saw at the very start, as early as late 76, 77 with WTBS, he saw that and he verbalized it and was in tons of interviews, myself and many others, bigger than me included, saying that's going to be the death of the territories, because who's going to want to see your little localized stars that you see all the time, when these guys are on national TV, on the Superstation, the Ted Turner WTBS, the Tommy Riches and Wahoo and Flair and Stan Hansen, Ole Anderson, Ivan Koloff, so many great names floating in and out, Brody and Mark Lewin. And he sold and advised Dory, said, we have to sell Amarillo. They had taken it over after Dory Sr. passed in 73. And he saw the writing on the wall and even advised, because he didn't, Dory and Terry didn't offer it up to Dick Murdoch and Blackjack Mulligan. Mulligan and Murdoch said they wanted to buy and try to keep Amarillo alive. And Terry said, you guys are crazy. It's just not going to happen. And they did their best. It didn't last. And then somebody thereafter tried it for a while, but I don't think it lasted even 2 years when they took over Amarillo. So Terry, and I forgot to say, as a Madonna or shapeshifter, every time he'd come into Los Angeles, he had a different look. When he first started seeing him, he had bleached blonde short hair, and then he grew it out longer, and then he dyed it, or had it go back to its natural dark brown color. And then he came in wearing completely different outfits than he ever had before. And then the goatee and, mustache look. And, he won twice our local Los Angeles America's title, our little podunk title, before he ever got the NWA strap. And obviously won many others. But I think Terry just saw the future. He could see the writing on the wall. And with his Japan experience, even saying and telling Meltzer, watch what's going on in Japan, because you're going to see what'll happen in the U.S. maybe 5-6 years later. So that was Terry Brain. He could see and knew that you constantly had to evolve. The business had to evolve and was going to evolve. And if you didn't keep up with it, you were dead. And so that's why he evolved. And, he foretold, the coming of Vince and all of that stuff. And the territories dying and all the talent being consolidated, which was, a shame, but got to go to Tim Hornbaker's book, I guess, on that, The Death of the Territories.
On that note, let's get into with Tim Hornbaker.
So I'm Tim Hornbaker, the author of The Last Real World Champion, The Legacy of Nature Boy Ric Flair, and you're listening to Crazy Train Radio.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, this next guest is an author that has worked on such historical tunes, including the National Wrestling Alliance, The Untold Story of the Monopoly that Strangled Pro Wrestling, and Death of the Territories. But also, he has done singular subjects that have many branches to them, such as Master of the Ring, the biography of Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, and the newest book, The Last World Champion, The Legacy of the Nature Boy Ric Flair. Woo! Let's welcome author Tim Hornbaker.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
How are you? Mike, I will start with you since you have worked with Tim before, so...
Oh, I love Tim's books. I mean, we all love baseball here, as we were just discussing, and he's done some incredible books as well, at least 4, like Fall from Grace, the Black Sox, turning the Black Sox white, the Black Sox, obviously, scandal, Ty Cobb. So there might be 3. Are there more than 3 baseball books besides Capital Revolution?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, there's been 3 baseball books, and then I've done 7 on wrestling. So 10 total.
Yeah, one of them, Capital Rev, The Rise of the McMahon Wrestling Empire. And, of course, this book in audio. I don't know if the audiobook is available yet or a day or two on Flair. But tell us how, Rick had his own book come out. And many of us felt it was more influenced or sanitized by WWE. And we were hoping for something different. And now you've come up with that. So maybe tell us how you got the impetus, because you were writing about organizations and large groups. This, to my knowledge, is your first book on a single wrestler. So tell us when it went into thought process-wise doing this, and what can everybody look forward to in a book on truly the last real NWA world champ.
Thanks, Mike. That's a great question. I actually stepped into writing biographies with my last book, which was on Buddy Rogers.
And that's right. That's right.
Kind of, yeah. So, writing a biography is so much different than writing about an organization. And I've definitely learned that through trial and error and kind of going forward with these projects. But after finishing my book on Buddy Rogers, I was looking for my next challenging project. And as you said, the Flair autobiography was a good book, but I think there was still room for clarity and to expound on some of the stories that he talked about. So I looked at it and I tried to decide what I was going to do. Do I work on another biography or an organization from the old days, or do I step in and try to do something on more modern performer? And as a fan, separate from being a wrestling researcher or a historian, I always enjoyed Ric Flair in the ring. And like most people, you see him in the ring and what he does, and he was one of the best, as a promo guy and as a performer. So I thought, hey, this is an opportunity to take this giant project on from a historical perspective and dive in and see if I can, clarify some things and really tell his full story with sourcing and extra information. And I went ahead and dove in head first.
If I could jump back in here, you bring up a couple points. And first one being, with your stuff, you always seem to do deep research. So what is your process like? And is there a different process in terms of biographies versus topics like Death of the Territories, Capitol, and NWA and such?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there is a different kind of a process. I mean, I think with a biography, you're really you're focusing on one person first and foremost, and then you kind of fill in the gaps with for a wrestling individual, you fill in the gaps with the territories they worked and the other people they met in their travels, or however you're trying to frame the narrative. With an organization, you dive in and again, you take it by maybe chronologically, and then you take it by major events that have happened. So there definitely are challenges in doing both, and you kind of have to look at it from a different point of view. I personally have enjoyed working on biographies because you really get to center on an individual and try to understand, what made them tick and the major moments in their life, personally and professionally. So those are difficult books to work on, especially for someone like Flair, who has so much already out there. But I think I felt confident enough that, similar to my Joe Jackson and Ty Cobb books and even my Buddy Rogers book, that I was able to find new information on these individuals that nobody had ever seen before. And that was something that I knew was going to have to be important for this book, and that was something that I really focused on.
Well, I'm curious to know there's so much to dive in with Flair, but was there any communication with him when trying to put this project together?
That was something that I considered early on, and I even spoke to my editor about it, and we concluded that we wanted this book to be independent. I think it would have been interesting, but I think that Flair has, through his book, he did a singular autobiography, and then he did another one with Charlotte. He's had a podcast. I mean, Flair's perspective, he did a very long shoot interview with High Spots. So his version of events have really been out there, and we wanted to, take this from a historical point of view, a historian's point of view, and you just utilize the facts rather than share the same stories that maybe have already been told. So I think that was kind of something that we had to figure out early on, and then make that decision, and then we just went forward from there.
Mike?
I was going to say, too, because I'm always focused on when the Mid-Atlantic Booker brought in Buddy Rogers. They were old fans friends since the 50s. And, Buddy was brought in essentially kind of passing that torch. He never did get to pass the torch to either the other two Nature Boys, Roger Rip Kirby or Buddy Landell, if you remember that canceled Joel Goodhart TWA show, Battle of the Nature Boys. But since I don't have the book yet, haven't seen it, I'm hoping you delved into Buddy's X period of time. I forget if it was about 6 months in Mid-Atlantic. What was it, 1978? And
yes, absolutely.
Having those matches with Flair, historic.
Yes, no, absolutely. That was definitely the meeting of the Nature Boys there in the Mid-Atlantic region. And you're right, George Scott was the guy who he worked with Flair, worked with Buddy Rogers early in his career under Jack Pfeffer. And George Scott was always influenced and kind of idolized Buddy Rogers. So I think when he was the booker of the Mid-Atlantic region and he saw the opportunity to now kind of mold this new, this rising star in Ric Flair, he kind of opened the door for Flair to take on the Nature Boy gimmick, and then, promote him as he's rising up through the ranks. And then, of course, as you said, brought in the original Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers himself, to do that great angle that they did. And it was definitely for sure kind of like a passing of the torch. And all those years later, they were going to do it again in the Northeast with Buddy Landell, and that didn't pan out. But yeah, you're absolutely right about that. It was definitely an interesting time for wrestling history.
Really, two quick things, and I'm throwing back, of course, to Jonathan. Jack Pfeffer, I've long nagged Keith Greenberg and Brian Solomon. I nagged Brian Solomon to do a Gorilla Monsoon book. I throw out Tootsmont, Gorilla, and Jack Pfeffer, and he went with the Gorilla Monsoon. But I would love to see somebody of your stature do something on Pfeffer and all the uniqueness, the Bobby Bruns, all of those characters. And I'm sure you've seen Jim Cornette's 18-tape series, which I was sent, and others were about 30 some odd years ago off VHS, where when Rick first, comes in after doing all those jobs like the Chris Taylor, which was pretty historic, etc., in the AWA for Vern when he was done with the training with Billy Robinson and Vern in the barn. And then he comes in as Rip Hawk's, nephew or cousin, and did his first woo. That's all filmed. That's all there. Do you talk about, I'm sure you must, his entry, how he got to Mid-Atlantic and what happened at the beginning, well before the Nature Boy stuff?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a very important period of time in Flair's development, because he's coming out of the AWA at that point, having been just a preliminary guy. Vern Gagne, I don't know what his vision was for Flair, but he was maintaining a very low profile in that organization in terms of his spot on the card. And he did have a few moments here and there. You mentioned his match. He had a higher profile match with Chris Taylor. But yeah, moving from Minneapolis to Charlotte was a defining moment in Flair's life, of course. And once he got to the Mid-Atlantic region and George Scott and Jim Crockett, they paired him up with Rip Hawk, and they formed a successful tag team. And then Flair started to branch out from there, and he was learning from guys like Johnny Valentine, and then he had a long feud with Wahoo McDaniel. And that is really the road he was on, building up and then getting the Nature Boy gimmick. And then, of course, the plane crash happened around that same time. But Flair's development had taken a major jump in a very short amount of time. He had gone from a preliminary guy to a champion in the Mid-Atlantic region, and the sky appeared to be the limit. And then, of course, the plane crash happened.
And just lastly, too, Ray Stevens. I mean, how much better can you get learning at the foot, the learning tree of Buddy Rogers, everybody else, plus Ray Stevens, who we often saluted for a lot of his moves sets. Just incredible guys that he was around then.
Absolutely, yeah. You can't find a better crew of guys that are going to be influential. And, of course, Ray Stevens learned from Buddy Rogers, and then Stevens had an influence on Flair. So there is a lineage there and it goes through Ray Stevens. And Ray Stevens influenced tons of guys through his style and just his ability. But yeah, Flair was able to see Nick Bockwinkel and just all these different great performers in the AWA, and then now into Mid-Atlantic, where you have Valentine and McDaniel and some of these other great guys who, of course, all in different ways had an influence on him.
Well, I'm curious to know, because obviously, like you stated, that Flair's story's been told and people know about the workload and the promos and financial issues and such. But were you able to possibly learn why there was always such a difficult time from Ric Flair to Richard Flair and separating the two?
Yeah, I don't. For me personally, I did not, because that is something that I think is beyond my skill level. I don't know if anybody has ever figured that out. I know in the 30 for 30 documentary, his first wife Leslie had a interesting perspective on what was going on with Flair and his personal life, and maybe what had affected him so much. But as far as what I was able to write and the limitations of not speaking to Flair and having him open up directly to me, there was limitations on what I was able to do and what I was able to put in the book. And of course, I was not going to speculate on something that I couldn't for sure prove one way or another. But as you say, the Flair kind of the transition was never there. He became the nature boy, and he lived the gimmick, as they said, lived the rock and roll lifestyle. And I think that is something that fans and historians will always just kind of have to take at face value, because that was the truth. And as far as why it was or what was going on behind the scenes, I don't know if we'll ever understand.
Well, it's interesting because you did Capital Revolution with ECW Press. And as we sit, it's 9/13. And yesterday was the official transition for the Endeavor sale for WWE. So would you ever expect that there wouldn't have been a McMahon fully at the helm of WWE?
Absolutely not. I mean, there's been rumors of a possible sale for years. That's been something that's been floated around. And for this to actually happen, it's definitely the end of an era. And it is surprising. And years ago, I never would have thought that. And, you put a kind of a cap on a segment of wrestling history that was so influential and so important and revolutionized the business, taking it. And I won't say the old, the thing that's always been floating around, the statement that they, Capital Wrestling and Titan Sports, they took it out of the smoke-filled halls and put it on the grand stage. Wrestling was evolving. But McMahon, his father, his grandfather, they all had a tremendous influence in how the business developed. And Vincent Kennedy McMahon with Titan Sports and the WWF and the WWE, building WrestleMania to this gigantic spectacle that it's become, there's no way to dismiss or avoid or to, discredit what he was able to accomplish, because he changed the business. And now for things to have evolved to this point where the company has been sold and now there's like this major corporation in charge, it's hard to say how the industry will change from here. I don't know if it will change in any great leaps or bounds, but it is definitely a surprise to me overall that this has happened and McMahon is no longer in charge over there.
Mike, you have anything?
Well, yeah, yesterday also marked the first time that a McMahon has not had a majority financial stake in the company. That's a huge point, because dating back to Jess McMahon, et cetera, and Capital Sports and all of that, seeing how the company has changed and morphed. And speaking of a real world champion, a guy who traveled, had that insane schedule that Jack Briscoe said nearly killed him, to where he asked, like Bruno Sammartino did to Vince Sr., but Jack Briscoe asked Munchnick, please take the belt off me. He kept asking because the schedule was rough. And Rick was the last guy to endure that. But he endured a lot of tragedies in his life, I'm sure is in your book, The Last Real World Champion, The Legacy of Nature Boy Ric Flair, from the plane crash to Reed's death, of course, which was, horrific for anybody that knew what a shining star Reed Flair was. And at the same time, Steamboat's son, the two of them amateur wrestling, who would have ever thought that? But that was so cool at the time. And then, I was around Rick for happy moments like the Starrcade in Tokyo, March of 91, after the big title unification thing, which was a clean loss by Flair to Tatsumi Dragon Fujinami. I think it was March 21st, 91 at the Tokyo Dome, the first New Japan versus NWA/WCW show there. And afterwards at the victory party at the Inoki's Kyo Plaza Hotel, Flair is putting up his Rolex at the time. I think he only had the one at that time. Arm wrestling. I know I emailed you this story where Scott Norton is arm wrestling guys like Butch Reed and Ron Simmons and Bam Bam Bigelow. And then he pins Flair's arm, and Flair had to cough up the Rolex, which he got back from Scott Norton. But I'm sure you're covering a lot of that, because that is, and the many marriages. He's we have a love of Ric Flair. We're sympathetic with all that he's gone through. He's gone through an awful lot of negatives to go with all the highs and the positives and the record world championships that make up this book. So I'm just asking, my question is, I am sure you covered some of these lows as well as the highs in his life. And a normal person probably couldn't have endured all of that stuff, let alone the number of divorces, and et cetera.
Mike, 100%. Yes, I cover all of the major events in his life. I've come to think in my mind, and I don't explicitly say this in the book, but Flair is definitely a survivor. As you said, the plane crash, the loss of his son, he had incredible, crushing debt to the IRS, to different tax authorities, going back to the 70s. He had, as you mentioned, the divorces, the relationships that soured. He had problems in WCW with Jim Herd, to the point where he sought a sports psychologist at times for self-confidence issues. And we're talking about the Nature Boy here. So he's definitely had issues and bumps in the road, but he's overcome them. He's been a survivor. He's proved time and time and again where he could, even the health problems. I mean, we didn't even get into that, where, he's really been on, the doorstep and bounced back. So all of this is covered in the book, and it's been said, and I could say it again, that a book could be written on his life outside the wrestling ring. Just a whole book on that. Just everything in his personal life can be just an entire book. And for me, because I'm balancing, the majority of the wrestling career with his personal life, I had to strike a certain kind of a balance between the two and do it in a kind of a way that made sense, chronologically, where it didn't overwhelm you on one side or the other. You see what's happening as you work your way through the book in his wrestling career and then in his personal life, and you get a sense that he did have a lot of personal challenges. So all of that is definitely covered in the book.
Very quickly, I want to say, I hope you mentioned what a Saint Wendy is. In fact, we call her Saint Fifi. She played obviously the maid on Flair for the Gold as Fifi the maid, but Wendy has been sort of a godsend, particularly after the last two wives that I saw him interact with. And the one thing, too, I mentioned, or I emailed you, and it may not be in the book, it was at a San Francisco Nitro, and Flair had some family stuff, and it's at the craft service table. I'm sitting there with him, Teddy DiBiase, and Paul Orndorff. Those three guys had quite a bit of history with each other and were territory guys. And Rick was just crestfallen or crushed that Bischoff had demanded, this is Rick's words, that, he'd fly out for this thing, but he had nothing to do on TV. So he wasn't even on camera for any of that stuff. And he was brought out for no reason. And he just was, I've never seen him that depressed, other than when his son passed. So that period of time, the ups and downs of both Russo and Bischoff in WCW, I'm sure that's also got to be in the book, because, he's made peace with Bischoff. I'm not sure if he's made peace with Russo for cutting the hair for no reason, without weeks and weeks of promoting it, just having it, happen on TV with David cutting his hair. That just made no sense at all. And I say that I've said that ever since. What the F was going on with that decision to not have Stips and promote it for a while if you have to go that route. And why cut his hair to begin with? He already had to do that during the whole Black Scorpion thing. Oh, there's got to be a whole chapter right there with Ole and the Black Scorpion for your book, right? Perhaps, hopefully, or maybe
it's in there. Everything is in there, Mike. I will say, do you know how many hair versus title matches that Flair survived against guys in the 70s? To have his hair cut for no reason, you're 100% correct. Some of the angles they had him in WCW, they buried him in the desert at one point. They had him in a psychiatric hospital at one point. So the situations they were throwing Flair into, he had to make, he had to somehow make it happen. He had to have a good attitude about it and go out there and perform these, but they didn't make any sense. They didn't advance any storyline. There was no follow-up or payback or a big moment for a ratings jump. So it all didn't make sense, and all of that is covered in the book. And I agree with you. WCW's booking issues were multifold at that point, and a lot of it didn't make a lot of sense.
Jonathan.
Yes. Two things for the Flair book, and there's something I want to bring up with Buddy Rogers afterwards before we wrap. But I'm curious to know, with Flair, what is your favorite Flair moment? But also, is there something during the process of this that you learned about Flair that maybe hasn't been touched on? Because obviously his story, like you said, has been told.
Absolutely. My favorite period for Ric Flair is 1989. I mean, I love his matches with Ricky Steamboat at that point, the trio of matches they had over the title, where it culminated in Nashville in May 7th, 1989. And then Flair regained the belt that night, but then immediately was attacked by Terry Funk, setting off another incredible feud. So for me personally, I love that period. Flair was on top of the world. He was doing everything correctly, and he just had, with Steamboat and Funk, two of the greatest professionals as opponents at such a great time for wrestling. That to me speaks volumes to what all of these guys meant to the business and how talented they were. You can go back at any point and watch any of those matches, any of the promos, and just be floored by it. In terms of finding interesting subjects in my research on Flair, there were a lot of things that when I was doing research that I identified as things that I wanted to focus on. And among them was finding out more about Flair's amateur wrestling background, because I've read in magazines or even in, here and there that he was some sort of an amateur champion, and I knew it couldn't be college, so it had to have been in high school. So one of the things that I centered on was tracking down records of when he was attending Wayland Academy in Wisconsin, and was able to find out that, yes, he was indeed an amateur wrestling champion at that school. And it wasn't it was amongst the private schools in the area. It wasn't a public school, the range of the competition, but he definitely was an amateur champion. That was something I was able to confirm and put into the book.
The other thing I wanted to ask, like I said, with the Buddy Rogers story that you did, and I'm a little jealous, and Mike will know this name and probably be shocked that I even know this name, but you had an opportunity to talk with Bobby Davis for that project. So what was that? Was that a godsend to be able to talk to Bobby, not only about Buddy, but just the history itself?
Hey, I'm going to tell you, gentlemen, right here and right now, meeting Bobby Davis, and it was a fortunate situation that I did. Meeting Bobby Davis and becoming his friend, I would say, changed my life in some ways. He was not only someone who could talk to me about wrestling, but was there for me talking about personal matters. And I had said this before. It got to the point where we would get on the phone and we wouldn't even talk about wrestling at that point. We would just talk about what was going on. And he had health problems, but he was always such a powerfully spoken man, and he was so successful in his life. He did so many different jobs in wrestling. He was so successful from an early age. He was successful in business. And I think anyone who met Bobby Davis and got to be close to him or a friend was influenced by him in one way or another. And I'll say this again, had I not known Bobby Davis and gotten that inside information about Buddy Rogers, I don't think my Buddy Rogers book would have been anywhere near what it needed to be in terms of clarifying things, because the big problem with Buddy Rogers was there was so much mysteriousness about him. There was a lot of things about his own health, the heart attack, and the reason why he didn't come back after 1963. There was so much going on that needed clarity, and Bobby opened that up for me. And he was a great guy. I still miss him. I wish others in the larger wrestling scheme could have gotten to know him, but he was a guy that pulled back from wrestling, only made a few appearances here and there, didn't open up his circle to a lot of people. And I was very lucky and fortunate to have been able to call him a friend.
Absolutely. Mike.
I've just got your text, so I'll try to be brief. I knew Bobby Davis. He did the intros to a Buddy Rogers tribute video I had done with Georgianne Macropolis' help. And he was living right near me in Southern California, or at least he was in SoCal, I think San Bernardino or something, when he had all those fast food franchises that Tim probably knows what I'm talking about. But they were all like on the East Coast. And Georgianne Macropolis and I lost touch with him. I guess he left California without telling us and then moved back to like Ohio, where like all of the history with Buddy had occurred. But he was with Buddy at Buddy's One and Only Cauliflower Alley. Same for Bobby, his One and Only Cauliflower Alley, that, you know, just a couple of months before Buddy had that thing happen at the supermarket and passed away. But where Roy Shire infamously had heat with Buddy Rogers dating back 40 years, and he sees Rogers and Bobby Davis standing next to each other. They're talking to the Vachons and John Tolis. And he went right up and elbowed Buddy. He spills the drink that he had in his hand on both he and Bobby Davis's shoes. And then Roy Shire says loudly, "Now I can die happy." It just amazing. But in contrast, Bobby Davis was just the greatest guy. He would do anything for you. He would help with questions on Buddy Rogers, as I'm sure he did with Tim's. I had questions, as did other folks like Jim Cornette. And was incredible, and does not get his due as a manager, because it wasn't just Buddy Rogers who he managed, but he managed, you know, others. And he continued on. I forget how long, maybe through 64, managing for Vince Sr., something like that. I'm just doing this off memory. I don't have anything in front of me.
Yeah, it was around there. Yeah.
Yeah, just really great, wonderful human being. And yeah, he could talk about politics and pop culture and everything. You know, but he did keep up with wrestling. And I think he was even getting, one of the big newsletters at the time. But was that when you made contact with him? Was he in Ohio, or had he moved on someplace else?
He actually, he had gotten remarried and settled in the Houston area. He was actually in the suburbs of Houston when I finally got a hold of him. And that's where he remained. But he had family in Ohio. And he did travel there often. I mean, that's where he was from. But yeah, he was in Texas at the time.
Why wasn't he brought in when Flair was in Mid-Atlantic, or Rogers was in Mid-Atlantic with Flair there? That would have been fun. I don't know if that was considered, but that would have been great for both your books. Had Bobby, I don't know if Flair ever spent time with Bobby Davis.
I don't know. I never came across that, but I think anyone would have benefited from Bobby's knowledge and just the experience he had. And he did it all at such a young age, but he experienced so much and met so many different people and was in so many different important events that I think he could have been a benefit to wrestling for his entire life had he chose to have done that.
Well, could have been a knowledgeable agent. And why hasn't Ric Flair, is Rick been approached? I'm sure he has. It's probably just not for him being an agent, like in WWE. He may be a little bit beyond that, but there's still a wealth of knowledge in his medulla oblongata.
I agree. Yeah.
Quote Monsoon. I'm quoting Monsoon there.
Yeah. I think he's got a wealth of information to provide to the business, and I'm not really sure 100%. I thought there was talk of him going into AEW at one point. I think certain other events might have sidetracked that, but you never know for the future. I mean, I hope he continues to have as much success as possible.
Well, the book is The Last Real World Champion. Tim Hornbaker, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate you gentlemen having me on. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Hey there, Friday fans. We know how much you enjoy the movies, enjoy grabbing your Friday merchandise and interacting with the Friday family, whether it be at conventions or during our particular watch-alongs. Well, when you're looking to get yourself masks, why not check out our friends over at Camp Blood Customs out of New York State and order your specific custom mask from any of the films. All orders are made specifically. Your needs and wants are. Make sure you find Camp Blood Customs on Facebook, Instagram, and all over social media and order yours today.
What does everybody want?
I'm former WWE superstar Al Snow, and you're listening to Crazy Train Radio.